Well, good morning. Another devotional. Today we're finishing our series from the Gospel-Centered Life for the month of March, and this morning is about conflict. Conflict is something that we would love to avoid or even maybe pretend doesn't happen in the church, and yet it's a reality. Part of being human is that we mess up, we hurt people, we find ourselves in conflict. And yet conflict is also a way that we can show and reveal the work of the gospel in our hearts and our lives. The way that you deal with conflict says a lot about how spiritually and emotionally mature that you are and how much the gospel is getting a hold of your heart, because God's grace is all about forgiveness, right? And can we forgive other people? Can we engage in conflict in ways that point people to Christ and deepen our relationships? So a great place well, first I wanted to say, the Gospel-Centered Life points out that many people are attackers. They sort of like to be in conflict, and they jump in and they just attack. When they find themselves in a conflict. And other people are withdrawers. They avoid conflict at all costs. They kind of step back. And yet neither of those ways is the way of Jesus. So let's learn more about that by looking at Galatians 2. Paul opposes Peter. When Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he was clearly in the wrong. Before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter in front of them all, "You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs?" Peter was being a hypocrite in this situation. When Jewish leaders weren't around, he would eat with the Gentiles. He wouldn't go through the ceremonial washings, and he lived in the freedom of Christ like he was supposed to. But then when Jewish people came, he went back to sort of his old ways of living according to the law. And Paul confronted him about this. And it was really interesting. So what did Paul do? He approached him publicly. He did not gossip about him. He didn't avoid the conflict. He didn't try to bully Peter, but he approached him directly, man to man, face to face. It needed to be public in this situation. It doesn't always need to be public. But the conversation needs to happen. He approached him and attempted to resolve the conflict. What was his motivation? His motivation was not winning the argument. It wasn't self-interest. It wasn't, to make himself even feel better. But his motivation was actually the gospel. You see that in verse 13. He was not acting in accordance with the gospel. And so he wanted to correct a brother, but to do so in love. He approached Peter in a very plain way. It was plain spoken. They didn't dance around. He was direct with him, and he invited a response. He invited a dialogue and said, let's resolve this. And this pointed to the gospel because it was about the truth of the gospel. And God is a lot like this, right? He doesn't pour out his wrath upon us, and he doesn't withdraw his love. He comes toward us in Jesus Christ, and he invites a response. But he comes to us in the person of Jesus Christ, who's full of grace and truth. And that is our model for reconciliation. That's our model for for navigating conflict. One other sort of piece of wisdom that to share with you would be to pray for the person. To pray for this person that you're in conflict with, to pray for this person who might be even becoming an enemy or might think of you as an enemy. Pray for them, because that is where God changes our hearts. But I hope that's helpful, that reminder of the truth of God's word, Galatians 2, and how to approach conflict with anyone in your life. Thanks for listening this morning. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you this Sunday for Easter worship, online or in person. Thanks. God bless.